Hey everyone, and welcome to the Ready to Fight podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Kimbrel, and this is my friend Neil Grogan. Neil, how are you doing, man?
Fantastic, man. Thanks for having me, Bruce.
Yes, sir, man. It's a privilege to have you here, and I am excited to get into this. Let me introduce Neil to the audience. Neil is married. He's been married for 15 years. He has 4 children. He is a Christian man. He's a former pastor. He's a former Marine. He works for Mighty Oaks Foundation, and many of you are aware of that. Mighty Oaks Foundation is a biblical based foundation that helps men find hope, restoration, and healing through a relationship with Jesus Christ. He is an aftercare manager and a chaplain for them, and he's been working for Mighty Oaks for a little over 8 years. Neil, it is good to see you, man. It's been a little
As
while.
good as it has been. It's hard when you're in Texas and your friends are all over the country.
But yeah, I can't remember what was the last session that we were together at. I was thinking it was Ohio, but I'm not sure. It's been a little
Probably
while, so yeah.
for
But
sure.
man, I'm super happy to have you. I'm excited to get into this content today. I know you've got some incredible stuff to talk about, so let's get into it, man. Why don't you walk us through what it was like growing up in the Grogan home, where you grew up at, and how many siblings you had?
Yeah. So grew up in the Dallas Fort Worth area, South Dallas kind of region. 2 parents, one sister, a couple years older. And growing up in the Grogan household was a sweet thing. My parents were faithful followers of Christ. They not without their own struggles, of course, and their own difficulties, but they really laid a good foundation for both my sister and I. Man, we grew up knowing that the word was where we could place our confidence, right? Because the word pointed us to Jesus, and Jesus is a solid rock to stand on throughout life. So I grew up in that kind of context, right? And we were faithful in the church. If the doors were open, we were there. But outside of that, it was kind of difficult for me because I didn't have like Christian friends. um if my friends in the church, they went to different schools, they didn't go to my school, or they lived in different towns. And so, man, like, I remember very clearly from an early age my mom praying with me at night for like God to send me Christian male friends. And he would answer that prayer eventually, but not until I was an adult, actually. So I kind of grew up feeling very alone in my faith and in a context that wasn't exactly a pro believer once I left our home or left the church.
Yeah. So did you go to a Christian school? What kind of school did you grow up?
Oh, well, I'm a product of Dallas public schools, and so I'm really weak in math. um, I guess it just depends on your teachers and where you landed. But no, I went to public school. Kind of quintessential American like life. Go to public school, check into church. At least in the South, right? I grew up in Texas, so you kind of went to church. That was kind of what people did. That was the business of life. And so on Sundays, we would go to the First Baptist there in town, in Cedar Hill, and went to public school and rinse, repeat, right?
You play any sports or anything like that?
Yeah, man. I played a variety of sports, but I really kind of sunk my teeth in on soccer, and so that's kind of what I played through high school and really since I was like 4 years old. I played that. I remember coming to a point. My dad said, because I really love baseball and I really love basketball, but he said, "Hey, you stink at those, so you're really good at soccer. So we're gonna do one thing."
Yeah.
So that was their way of like, reducing the running to every game all year round. That's a lot on a parent.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, as we all know. But yeah, so I played soccer, loved it. It was a joy. And then kind of came to a head and just decided to join the United States Marine Corps because I guess I was bored.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna ask next is what drove you to join in the military, but not just that, what drove you to the Marine Corps versus, the
Other branch.
the Army, or some of the other branches?
Well, in my opinion, there's really two. Having pastored next to Fort Hood for the last 10 years, I'm biased more now towards the Army. So no, man, I playing cowboys and Indians in the woods and running around and kind of like that vision of heroism in my mind all the time. So I kind of grown up in that context, like men lay their lives down. That was kind of value. My family, we loved our country. Always spoke well of our country, even when there were times where, things were chaotic. On a national standpoint, I remember those things. One thing that really strikes me is my parents always spoke well of America and the benefits, the freedom that we have in our nation, and how that's unique to the rest of the world. And so, man, we're very pro America household, but my parents didn't serve. I had an uncle who was a colonel in the Air Force, another uncle who was a Marine. But that was a long time ago, right? Like, and I didn't have much of a relationship with him, so I didn't really know him or much about him. But like this idea of fighting was always kind of, I guess, impressed on me. And then, September 11th happened.
Yeah.
Uh, that kind of seared my desires to do that in that moment. I remember, and this might sound strange, but maybe not to the audience that this targets, but I remember like praying after September 11th happened and asking the Lord to like keep this war going so I could go and fight and, you
Be
know,
a part of it. Yeah.
be a part of it. Yeah. My dad always said if somebody punches you in the face, you punch them back, like
Yeah.
you don't just wait. Like, you don't just put your hands in your pockets, you defend yourself. Which he will say today, that was his famous last words for me because it got me in a lot of problems.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So high testosterone, growing boy sees the towers go down, I resolved myself to go do something about that one day. And when I graduated high school, I was ready to sign then. I think my dad was afraid for me because he knew what kind of person I was, and I wasn't just going to join, and pick any job. I was going to go the infantry route. Like that was it. Like from a little boy, I wanted to be an infantry a Marine. I think the reason why I picked the Marine Corps over other branches was just because of the way everybody spoke about the difficulty of it. And I'm not saying other branches are difficult or whatever, but the inundated information I had about the branches was the Marine Corps is the hardest one, just on a general level, and it means something to be a Marine. Not that it doesn't mean something to be something else, but that was just I wanted to pick the hardest thing, and I wanted to do the hardest job based on the information I had, and that was the infantry and the Marine Corps. So when I graduated high school, my dad was like, "No way, I'm supporting you. No way, I'm blessing off on this. Like we're still active conflict." Hardcore. We're starting to surge towards the end of the Bush administration and the beginning of the Obama administration is when I joined in that kind of time frame. And things are escalating, it seems, on an international or geopolitical landscape. And so my dad was like, my blessing. So I waited 2 more years till I was 20. And I was like, I can't wait anymore. I always felt like my purpose was to lead people into a fight and to try and bring them back, which is interesting and so arrogant and naive for 18 to 20-year-old, punk kid to think about themselves. But I think that naivety ended up serving me well because it drove me in a particular way that, probably isn't usual for most 18 to 20-year-old kids.
Yeah. So before you joined the military, was you married already or did you get married after the military?
Yeah, so my wife Brittany and I, we grew up together. We've known each other our whole lives. No, I've known that girl since we were 14 years old and been stricken by her since we were 14 years old. Thought she was just amazing and kind and sweet and beautiful, and I wanted to be around her. And so, man, we were just such good friends growing up, and that's been a massive aspect to our marriage is that we've always been friends.
Yeah.
But we started like uh, so my wife is African American, growing up where we grew up, and it wasn't exactly smiled upon to be in an interracial relationship. And so we went through a lot of difficulties trying to date in high school, and so we kind of just decided to be friends because it was, we're receiving negativity on both ends of the court there. And then when we were 19, we just said, we don't care, we're we can't not be together. Uh, the rest of it was noise. We got engaged when before I joined the Marine Corps, and then planned our wedding for November 2010. But we found out I was probably going to be deployed or going to be on the intense part of a workup. So we expedited that and got married in July of 2010.
Awesome. So walk us through. You've waited 2 years or so from out of high school to finally join the Marine Corps. What was it like when you walked on those footprints for the first time? Was it a culture shock? Was you kind of prepared for it? You already knew what you were getting into? What was that like?
I mean, you read the books, right? Like, you know what you're going to walk into, and then you walk into it, right? Like, what's that Mike Tyson quote? Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Right.
It's like that, you get on those footprints and it's like, man, like this is wild. Why are
Yeah.
these people screaming at me? And I'm getting moved to each event like cattle. And it's definitely a shocking. I mean, you're tired, you've been traveling, you just had your head down on your knees as you approach the MCRD, whether that's Paris Island or San Diego. I went to San Diego, so I'm a Hollywood Marine, if you will. So, man, I mean, it's just like eye opening, right? And then once you get to your platoon for boot camp, that's eye opening. Like one of the first things they do is they just destroy everything, and
Yeah.
you're just left like, what do we do? What did we get ourselves into, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely eye opening and high stress, the whole time. You're trying to be perfect. And when you're not, there's consequences. And, that works really well in the military. By the way, it does not work really well in parenting or in marriage. You should not project that outside of the appropriate context. You're not dealing in the currency of life all day long, outside of, the military. So,
Yeah.
which I would run into some problems with as well. But yeah, man, it was a culture shock for sure. It was eye opening, but also kind of found like this beauty, this beautiful aesthetic in it all, and the simplicity of it all. Like, man, the structure was
Yeah.
good for me. The simplicity of every command, make your bed, simple, right, but meaningful. Um, Having to be able to carry your weight matters, and you don't think about every little aspect, but man, it all feeds into this bigger machine in the Marine Corps, and everything means something. And, once you kind of capture that vision, you're set up for success, I think.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. So you were infantry. So you did your boot camp, then you went to school of infantry, and then you make it to your unit. Where was your first unit at?
Yeah. 1st Battalion, 5th Marines there on Camp Pendleton.
So you guys get married, you're in your first duty station. And what was that like being a young married man in a new unit somewhere? Obviously, it's got to be a culture shock for your wife too. And I'm sure it was a big change for both of you.
Sure. Yeah. We, after once I hit the fleet, right, I got, leave to go home, get all our stuff, and drive across the country.
Yeah.
My wife is I will follow you to the ends of the earth kind of lady. So she's just excited about going somewhere different, so she's pumped about that. And going to California, she'll tell you what she wanted to be when she grew up was a beach bum. So, I mean, it fit for sure.
Wow.
And I'm like diehard Texan, like I bleed Texas. And so like leaving Texas was like, why doesn't the Marine Corps have a base in Texas? This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, moving to California was definitely different. I got a truck, I wear boots. I'm like, I stick out like a sore thumb in that context for sure. But But man, it was cool. We very quickly ended up in like where all the like Lance corporals live, the married Lance corporals. So that was a culture shock for sure.
Yeah.
These rundown hood apartment house things. But we quickly made some friends. Some guys who were in my platoon also lived in the same neighborhood. So, we kind of made some friends there and then became like, remember, I'm coming out of a Christian household and context. And then
Yeah.
I'm moving across the country and going into a context that does not follow Christ. They
Oh, yeah.
follow the, you know, partying and, you work hard, you play hard kind of idea of life. Man, the first, I think, compromise we made in our faith that would lead us down treacherous, routes was we weren't plugged in with Christian community at all. And so all the friends we had, they were not believers. And I'm not saying having unbelieving friends is not okay. It is, right? But we found our ideology shifting, our values changing, our standards were flexible at this point, and our character was being reshaped by the world.
Yeah.
And that's both my wife and I, and I did a poor job of leading her towards, good pastures, as a 20-year-old. Like, I was just enamored by the Marine Corps and wanted to be like everybody else and wanted to please the green machine, instead of trying to please the Lord in what I was doing.
Yeah. So how long was it till you found out that you were going to deploy? And then what effect did that have on your wife, knowing you guys are new here? She just moved, transitioned all the way to California. What is she going to do now?
Man, it was almost instantaneous, right? So I get to the fleet, I find out, hey, we're going to Sangin, and 3-5 was there at that time, and they were just getting hit really hard. They're just like we were. I mean, one of the bloodiest conflicts in Afghanistan. Been adopted into official Marine Corps history at this point. Like, it's I just actually got a chance to go to the National Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, and they have an exhibit there from the guys we lost from our unit. So that was like sobering. I remember thinking, because like all of my seniors were Fallujah, Ramadi, Najaf veterans, and like, grave breakers, if you know what happened in Najaf. And so they're trying to like set our expectations right. But you could also kind of tell like this Sangin beast was going to be different for them. Um, because of what we were hearing from 3-5, like, and what was going on there. So trying to like communicate in a way to my wife where she's like naive and like it's gonna be fine. We're all gonna be good, but also like being serious about it. So I was trying to find that like sweet spot, if you
Yeah.
will. When we found out, I was gonna be deploying in a few months, we started making plans, and what was important to me was she had some sort of support because I did know where I was going, and based on what 3-5 was going through, I need to make sure she's got support
Yep.
just in case. So we ended up sending her back to our family farm during that deployment, and my parents live across the gravel. So,
Yeah.
and my grandparents. So she was covered in support, and she was like 45 minutes from her family. So she was in a really good context for that. We got pregnant with our first right before that deployment. We found out right before that deployment. And so she was also really excited about all of that kind of stuff. So a little bit going into deployment, I feel like was the easiest part of it all.
Yeah.
Our world started crashing around us over the course of that deployment.
So what was the difference of, knowing that you're going somewhere, the big change again, she's going back home, she's staying with her parents. That's kind of what we did with my wife and I too. She did the same thing. It was just the best thing to do because Now she's around people. She's not by herself. But now you're in a foreign country and things are going crazy. What is that like? What is that like for you as your first deployment in a new Marine?
Well, what's interesting, the things that happened, you somewhat expect to happen just because if you've got good seniors, they've set your expectations right. And the information you have, and they did a great job at just preparing us for that. I feel like, but the first like catastrophic event, if you will, that we went through was on a personal level. We were a month or so into that deployment when we lost our first baby. And so my wife's on the other side of the world and going through that really by herself, even though she's got support. She's not the kind of lady who's just, especially then, who's just inviting everybody in on that. She's dealing with that despair alone. And then I get what's it called? They call
Red
your chain of command to make
Red
a phone.
Cross.
Yeah, so I have to call home, and that's what I found out, and that crushed me because there was a couple reasons. One, obviously, no one. I don't feel like nobody's ready to hear that their baby's died. And what do you do with that? Like in a mission mindset, like how does that come into play, right? So that was confusing for me. And then the other side of it was I was the last Grogan male, and now all of a sudden I'm thinking our legacy's done.
Yeah.
If I don't make it through, and so I'm dealing with that. The counsel you get from your buddies is like, man, shove that down, right? Like if you start thinking that, you're gonna get yourself hurt or killed or somebody else. So I didn't really I look back on it now and I really think like I understand it intellectually of shoving that down in a context like that, but it also robs you of an opportunity to process.
Yeah.
And I really needed to process that one because the rage that would rise up out of my heart from that was dangerous, and I would say equally dangerous to
Yeah.
not processing it. So yeah, so Brittany's on the other side of the world dealing with it alone. I'm on the other side of the world dealing with it alone. We're at a patrol base where I get one phone call once a month and we got to drive to go to the MWR. So that's, and that's risky every time you move on Route 611, that could be your life that day. So it's just tough. So we didn't get a lot of time to talk to each other. We're trying to figure it out in isolation, unfortunately. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So, when I think about like post traumatic stress or specifically combat stress, what I see in the lives of the men that we work with and in myself is there's this stacking effect of, traumatic experiences or like deep grief. And that was it for me. Like that was kind of like the first thing that everything else would start stacking on top of.
Yeah.
We had 17 KIA, over 200 casualties. Somebody it felt like was blowing up every day. Sangin's in this little valley where, Poppy is like king. So like the Taliban's getting all their money through the
Yeah.
Poppy industrial complex they have there in Sangin, and they do not want to give up an inch of ground. And so it's just, it's literally click by click fighting across that landscape. It's riddled with IEDs, or it was then. I'm sure it's not much has changed. I think they had projected like over 3,000 something IEDs in this little valley, uh, with, and they were scattered, right? So like most places, I feel like, whether you're talking about Marja or places in Iraq, like a lot of it's more focused on the road, roadside bombs and things like that. In Sangin, it was like a minefield.
Yeah.
And so even one of the enemy tactics was to go out and survey battle space the day before, plant IEDs where they thought Marines would take cover, and then they would engage you once you cross that area, when
Mhm.
you went to get cover, like what you're trained to do, you hit an IED. I mean, it was wicked tactics, effective for them to a degree. But yeah, if we I mean, so that was the it's a weird feeling when you can't trust the ground you're walking on, like not one step. And when everything you've learned in School of Infantry or even from, your seniors who were in Iraq on like patrolling and all that kind of stuff, it all goes out the window. And so we're navigating Sangin in a ranger file is the only patrol movement you can make. And your two man's got baby powder or shaving cream to identify the slightest bend in the movement. Because I mean, we've seen a guy take a step out of that line and hit and strike an IED. So I mean, it's like that's how you, and your one man's got a metal detect, a Valen metal detector, and he's trying we can't even have his gun up. So
Yeah.
it's a it's like waiting for the shoe to drop the whole time. And then when you don't hit one personally, you're kind of stuck there. I remember talking to one of my friends who's a triple amputee, and he said, "Man, I'm not really dealing with much PTSD." And I was like, "How?" You you have one arm left in your body. And
Wow.
he said, "Because I hit one." He's like, "You guys didn't hit him." And so like you're stuck always expecting to hit one.
Yeah.
And that I think that was a interesting way to think about it, at least for me personally. But
Wow. So navigating that now. So high tempo deployment, a lot of crazy stuff happening, a lot of casualties, a lot of KIAs. You make your way back home and now you have to transition. You're putting another hat on where now you're going to come home and be that husband again. What is that like to mesh the two of you that have been apart for so long and the situations that you've been through and the situations that she's been through with the loss of the child? What is that like coming back home?
it's catastrophic. I would add too, during that deployment, there was a little 6-year-old boy that got killed by the Taliban that would as he was high-fiving our team, they caught us in an ambush, and he was a casualty, and we couldn't save him, right? Like the yeah, I know this podcast is not like a war story podcast, but this was a sticky thing for me where I got stuck here. And when that happened, when that kid died, now I had this weird, twisted visual representation of what I was feeling with the loss of our own kid. And man, it was plaguing my dreams. And man, the way I would respond to that was in utter rebellion, right? Like I began to believe that God wasn't good, that he wasn't trustworthy, and he certainly wasn't in control if this happened, right? So I had a real issue with the problem of evil, which is common for a lot of people. And man, I was done. I was like, I'm done with my faith. I mean, I threw away Bibles. Like my response to that event was, instead of running to God, who has all that I need in him, I ran away and chose my flesh. And so that's how I'm reuniting with my wife, is with that in mind. I tell guys a lot about this, especially when I like do trainings for like pastors and stuff like that. One of the things that I talk about with them is you got to teach your people a theology of suffering. Like the way I grew up was, if you do these things, these Christian principles, then life is going to go well.
Yeah.
Almost like God does quid pro quo with you, like I read my Bible, where's my blessing, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh, and there always is a blessing, but again, expectations are important, right? The Lord is more concerned with conforming you into the image of his son than he is about taking your problems away. And that's for your good, and that's for his glory ultimately. So I had no theology of suffering, going into a war zone and in life. And so my bubble popped quick. And that was kind of the impetus for my rebellion, I feel like. And so when Brittany and I reunited, my eyes were on me. My eyes were on my pain, on what I wanted in life, my desires. And I didn't even see her and her pain and her suffering and what she was going through.
Yeah.
And so that just led to a very volatile dynamic because Brittany, again, on the other side of the world, dealing with her stuff in isolation, was responding in a, we would say biblically a fleshly way, right? Like a sinful way. She's trying to deal with her own despair, and she's dealing with it through like buying things or, really things that made her comfortable, which
Yeah.
is okay. But she wasn't being honest with me about, our finances. And so the day I got home from Afghanistan, all of it comes to light. And I find out what our money situation actually was. And it wasn't like terrible or anything, but it meant that I couldn't serve my flesh with that money. And so because my eyes were locked on myself, and I was about Neil, man, I would put her in a category that she never belonged, which was she's my enemy then. She stole from me, she's my enemy. I mean, that's how I was viewing it. It was totally twisted. And I just spent the better part of a year dealing with my enemies a certain way.
Yeah.
And so, man, I just destroyed her. I destroyed her spirit. Yeah. I mean, it's the greatest regret of my life is how I treated my wife and instead of as a treasure, I treated her as an enemy. And if you can go back in time and take some things back and do some things differently, that's on the top shelf for me.
So, did you have any more deployments following this one, or was that your single deployment?
Yeah, great question. So, I did another workup for a deployment, but I ended up getting pulled off of that deployment because of the way my life was collapsing around me.
Yeah.
Um, I was still being a successful Marine, if you will, but personally, I was in utter chaos. Again, I'm dreaming about this kid dying every day, and it's like my kid in my dream. It's not some other, and it was bad. I mean, like that kid's parents were there with us when he got shot. Like we were in his house working on him, so I saw the father's response, the mother's response, like all of it, right? And so like in my dream I was the parent, and watching this over and over and over again. And so I'm not sleeping. And so, you talk to your friends, right? In the military, I'm like, hey, what should I do about this? They're like, man, just drink. You drink enough, you won't think of any of that stuff. I can do that, right?
Yeah.
So it got to the point where I was drinking like a fifth of whiskey a day and I was like coming to work. I was getting sober during PT, morning PT, It's just awful, an awful way of living, and things are getting escalating at home. Like I'm getting worse and worse, and I'm treating Brittany worse and worse. And during that time, we got pregnant with my oldest, Michael, and man, I'm making her. You're gonna pay me back. All this mess, all
Mm.
this foolishness. I'm making her work selling gym memberships on the beach where she's 9 months pregnant, like on her feet the whole time, like to pay for my alcoholism, my drunkenness.
Yeah.
And again, I just don't care. I'm like looking at stuff on the computer, leaving it up for her to find. You know, I was just miserable. I remember telling her once, I'm Irish. I can be miserable the rest of my life, but you don't deserve this. You need to leave me. You're better off if you leave me. And she's like, I'm not going anywhere. And when we were engaged, we had a long conversation about divorce and things like that. And one of the things that we said, we promised each other is we would never use that word ever.
Mhm.
And man, like that was of all of the covenantal promises that we gave to one another in our marriage, the one that we didn't break was we weren't going to sling that word out. And it gave us just enough grit. I feel like to get, eventually the Lord would move us past that. But that was like the one thing we clung to was like, and we were for each other at the end of the day. Like, I know that's like talking out two sides of your mouth, but I always loved that girl since the moment I laid eyes on her. And the same is true for her. We found one of her spirals from like high school one time in a move, and it had her Brittany Grogan. She was scribbling in there.
Destined.
It was a train wreck, right? So I'm doing this workup, and we're getting ready to do mountain warfare training out at Bridgeport in California. And I come home from work one day. I'm a fifth of whiskey in. When Brittany gets off of work, she comes home and she sees this trash that I left up on the computer. And she challenged me. She said, "Is this all I'm worth to you?" And man, I picked that laptop up and I threw it at my 9-month pregnant wife. And by God's grace, missed her and hit the apartment door, and laptop blew up or whatever. And she told me, "You need help, Neil. It's not safe around you anymore," something to that effect. And now I had a decision to make with my life, right? Like, what did I love more, myself and the core, or my family? And I went to work the next day. We're like a week out from Bridgeport, and I remember seeing my gunny, and I'm like walking towards him, and in my head, I'm like making this choice.
Mhm.
And I chose the Marine Corps in my head, but when I got to Gunny Woodard, what came out of my mouth was something different. And I chalk that up to the Spirit of God at work in that moment, because I, I confessed a domestic to him. I told him about my drinking patterns. Like, I laid it out, right? And that's like throwing your career away.
Yeah.
And I was a career minded guy, like that was it. All I wanted to do. I was going to that was it. I could shoot, move, and communicate. Can't do anything else with my life, and because Dallas public schools, so
Yeah. That's right.
I don't have options. And man, he responded with grace, and with the a lot of what you would expect from a gunnery sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. He said, "All right, well, I need to send you to the Wizard, but before we do that, let's go do this mountain warfare training and see if the training and that time of separation will be helpful.
Wow.
Let's see if we can train the problems out of your life." Yeah, that didn't work, Bruce.
Yeah.
I came back from that just as miserable as when I left, and he set me up to go down to behavioral health in Mainside on Camp Pendleton. And I remember my buddy Andy Cedargren, who's a believer now, and he wasn't then. He was like my drinking buddy, my best bud, and one of them. And he was driving me down there because he had just got out of rehab. So he knew where it was at because it's in the same facility. He's driving me down there, and we get to the parking lot. And the last thing he said to me was, "Whatever you do, lie about how much you drink, or they're going to throw you into rehab." So I was like, all right, too easy, right? So I go in there. I'm thinking, what's an appropriate amount of alcohol to consume daily for an infantry Marine? At least half of whatever you're doing, right? And so the Corporal Grogan, how much do you drink a day? I'm like, half a bottle of whiskey. Oh, Bruce, it turns out that's an inappropriate amount of alcohol to consume daily, and they threw me into rehab. Um, but I'm thankful for that because it exposed um, some deeper issues that I didn't think. I thought I just had a drinking problem, to be honest. And then they start talking about what's going on in you and why you're so angry, and what are you trying to mask, and things come to light. And so I was scheduled to go to Point Loma, which is the inpatient deal, and Michael was about to be born, my oldest, and I pled with them to let me do outpatient so I could see my son, because once you're in, you're in. Like, you can't, like, that's it. And they worked with me. They said, "All right, you're gonna get breathalyzed every day. You'll get blood work on Mondays. If you, if you drink, you're done. Like UCMJ will come into play. And so it was October 2nd when he was born. And I remember October 2012, I'm holding this little baby. In one hand, I have a bottle of Wild Turkey 101 in the other hand. And I was like, I had this like moment of clarity. Oh, I'm going to be one of those dads, you know?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be one of those dads. And so I finished that bottle of whiskey because in my mind I said, "You're not a quitter, Neil." Stupid. That's true though. And then and then I checked into rehab the next day. I've been sober since. But really that was me making a decision to like I will do whatever it takes to be a decent father, to be a decent husband, and to get back to the fleet.
Yeah.
Because I could, I was told you can't do your job like this, right? And so they pulled me off the next deployment because I wasn't going to be able to finish rehab in time. And yeah, so I wrote basically naval medicine a blank check to fix me, and they did their best, but it didn't produce any fruit, to be honest, other than my sobriety. The other like lie I believed, your podcast, which I love, is called Ready to Fight, right?
Hmm.
And I thought I knew something about fighting at this point in my life, but there's a fight that we can't see. And oftentimes that fight is around what is true. Um, there's a lot of distortions and lies that we believe we cling to, and that will take your lunch money, you know? And one of the lies I believed which was a lie. I mean, it was outright falsehood, was I can't get better with my wife and son in my life. And so, man, I abandoned my family, sent them back to Texas. And Brittany will tell you that was the thing that hurt her. Of all of the stuff that I put her through, that's what hurt her the most, was I walked away from them and turned her into a single mom for like a year and a half to get better. And so after that last like straw, my wife was totally jaded and scorned by me at this point. And I would say she didn't even like I tell guys like she didn't even like my smell, you know, like she didn't really want to be around me all that much. We had good conversations and stuff through that, but genuinely like I had done the one thing that was like her line of no pass, right? And erector, and her heart hardened towards me. Yeah, so free housings is always a gift. And so we had a farmhouse on our farm that nobody lived in. So Brittany and Michael went and lived in that house. And again, my parents are across the street. And man, my mama just loved my wife and my son. Whew. She stepped up and stepped. My parents did what I should have been doing. And it's the greatest gift they've ever given me. It's the greatest grace they've ever shown us. But my mom would take Brittany to like the women's ministry thing, and they would talk about how to pray for me. And man, the Lord would just use that in such a profound way to like give a little bit of hope. And yeah, they were just so great. That church full of senior citizen prayer warriors just loved my wife and my son when I was just focused on me. And then on the other side of it, I was going through everything they said that would fix me. So I did 28 sessions at EMDR, which apparently you're not supposed to do that many. And I did exposure therapy, cognitive processing therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. I was on 15 different psychotropic medications. I've been through anger management twice. I did. And when like they exhausted all of the Western medicine approaches to trauma because it wasn't fruitful, they threw the Eastern medicine stuff at me. And so I'm doing Tai Chi and yoga, and kind of the thing that like emptied all of the hope that I had that one of these things was going to work was called Reiki or chakra therapy. Is where they like put you on a table face down, a bunch of smell goods around you, and some lady floats her hands above your body, adjusting your energy. And yeah, that didn't work. And you know, I went home. I was staying at this old couple was loving on me, and so I could stay off base. And I was living in Fallbrook on this avocado grove or whatever. It was a beautiful place, but it had like a mother-in-law suite, so I stayed there. And I remember like going, nothing works, nothing can fix me. And I realized that the common denominator in all this was me, and the only shot that my family had towards health was to remove the problem. So it was a Sunday, it was raining outside. I say that because usually I would go to the park with my dog, and I couldn't. I made the decision to take my life, and sorry about that. I made the decision to take my life, and um, you know, right when I was about to pull the trigger, man, my dad had all these little ditties he would say to us growing up, you know, like "Don't show your butt, show Jesus," or be an impact player, or the one that came to my mind was "Do what you know is right, get in the Word." And it was just stuck in my head. I couldn't pull the trigger. And so I decided, okay, I'll do something churchy since it's a Sunday, and then I'll kill myself. But I just got to get this voice out of my head. And so I got on YouTube, and I could only remember one guy's name. His name's John Piper. He's a pastor at the time in Minnesota. He did like a youth conference I went to when I was a kid, and that's like the only name I could think of. I punched his name in there. I clicked the first video, and I watched this video of a frail, feeble old man in a tweed jacket stand at the podium and with more power than anything I've ever seen in my life recite Romans chapter 8. Like, it wasn't preaching, it wasn't eloquent speech, it was just the word straight down the pipe. And the stone on my heart, Bruce, exploded. Yeah, I literally remember just like there's life and peace promised, and I don't have that. In verses 5 through 7, it says, "If you live by the flesh, you will die by the flesh. But if you live according to the Spirit, there's life and peace." I was like, I've done the live by the flesh thing. What does it mean to live by the Spirit? And so I called Brittany, and I was like, listen to this Bible verse. And she said, because the last phone call we had, I had cursed her and said a bunch of awful stuff. And then the next phone call was, listen to this Bible verse. And she said, are you schizophrenic? If that tells you about the road ahead, I don't know what else would. But I mean, I left. I went and found a place, and I bought a Bible because I didn't have one. And I started reading Romans 8 like over and over again. I had all these questions in my mind. Okay, I don't believe God's good. I don't believe he is trustworthy. I don't believe he's in control, but this guy's now he's saying that God is trustworthy, that God is in control, and that he is good. And I gotta run this to the end, you know? And so, man, I bought that Bible. I just started reading it and eating it. And then when I went on terminal leave, I like got on Amazon and I bought anything and everything connected in the algorithm to that one guy's name that I had, you know, which led me to a bunch of great books on despair and on hope and on suffering and on, you know, anxiety, all the stuff that I was really dealing with. And anytime the author would like cite a verse, I would open up my Bible and read the whole section, not just the verse, but the whole section. And I was just eating, man. I spent $1,000 on books and made my wife so upset. But man, at the end of it, by the time I got off terminal leave, I believed that God was good, that he loved me, and that he was trustworthy, and he's in control. And That's the most hope that I can have. And although the world's wisdom couldn't heal me, I had a God who could. And so I started walking that, Bruce. When Brittany and I reunited, again, like she didn't want much to do with me. Everything I did ticked her off. Breathing around her ticked her off, you know. And on my way home to reunite, so I'm driving from California to Texas. I stopped at this church. I knocked on the pastor's door before I went home. I said, "What's the Bible say about PTSD?" And he said, "I don't know. I don't got nothing for you, bud." Man, I think he said something like, "I'll ask somebody who may know." But I walked out of his office like going, "I'm alone. I got to figure this all out by myself." And man, there was this associate pastor at that church. And like a good associate pastor, he was eavesdropping. But what was cool about this guy was he was a part-time pastor and a full-time firefighter for Waco Fire Department. And he said he was posted up in the hallway and he said, "Hey, man, I overheard you talking to the other pastor." He's like, "I think I can help you. You want to get lunch?" And man, that guy, David, he would open up God's word and he would apply it to my heart. Like he would preach the gospel like I'd never seen and show how each aspect of my heart Jesus addressed. And it transformed my life. You know, when I first got home, I think I was trying to like earn my wife's forgiveness. To be honest, I was trying to do a bunch of stuff. You know, I was trying to like get her to feel different about me by being like super dad and super husband. And again, she didn't like me. So like everything I was doing was just picking her off. And I remember meeting with David and telling him about all that. You know, he said, "Hey, turn your Bible to Ephesians 5, read verse 25." I turned there and love your wife like Christ loved the church, gave himself up for her. And I remember going, "I'm doing this, David." And he goes, "Oh, are you? Or are you just doing a bunch of stuff to manipulate an outcome you desire?" Yes, like, how dare you tell me truth, you know? Like, just, he goes, "You go love your wife because you love God. You go sacrifice, not who cares about what ends up happening? God calls you to do this and he loves you and he saved you and he's redeeming you. He's restoring your life right now. You can't control the outcome, Neil." And like for the first time, like I think my control issues were exposed. Because you want to control the outcome, right? When you're on a battle space, you want to control the outcome. You want to mitigate risk. You want to have the right tactics to employ so that at the end of it, you all come home, you know? But in this kind of fight, like the tactic is the cross. And that's all you got. And man, it drove me in a renewed way, right? And from that position, the Lord would begin to restore and heal our marriage. And to the point where, you know, Brittany said to me, I guess it was like 6 or 7 years ago now, um, she said, "If I had to go through all that again to get the man who you are today, I would do it." And that was like the last thing that like, I don't know, I just saw the goodness of God, you know, and to go from God can't be good and he's not trustworthy, he's not in control. And then to see his goodness and his trustworthiness and his sovereign hand at work in my life, like see what the Lord could produce in my faithfulness to him. It was like, I don't know, the loop closed and man, I just I don't want to do anything other than follow after him as hard as I can, you know. And I'm not perfect by any means and I fail daily, but again, I know there's life and peace in Christ and there's not life and peace anywhere else. That's a great question. So when I was in um on the struggle bus while I was still in the Marine Corps, uh, I had changed units. I was with Second Battalion, Fifth Marines during this time frame, and then they they were like, "Dude, you're wasting a bed. You know, you're a waste of a number. So we're gonna put you in Wounded Warrior Battalion. You can get better there, and you can come back, right?" So I end up getting orders to Wounded Warrior Battalion, and this is like 2013. So I'm actually there with like Brandon Kuneth and a guy named Chris Carlisle, who's gone home to Christ today, but he was kind of one of the first guys through Mighty Oaks in those early years. And there's another guy named Dusty who was there, who's no longer with Mighty Oaks, but he was in those early years. And so I'm in Wounded Warrior with those guys. And one day, Chad Robichaux, the founder of Mighty Oaks, showed up with this busload of MMA fighters, and he was giving out free tickets to this MMA event. And he said, "Hey, I'm gonna give these tickets out, but more importantly, I want you to sign up for Mighty Oaks. We're not this clinical thing. We're just guys who have gone through the same stuff you have. We're trying to help the next guy down the road, kind of pitch." And I was like, okay, I signed up, man, back in 2013. Well, this other organization came in like the next day or within the week, and basically, like, they said, "We will buy plane tickets for you to go home to see your family or to bring your family here." And so I took them up on that, and I went and spent time with my wife and my son because I hadn't seen them at that point, I think in like 4 months. And so I actually didn't go through Mighty Oaks then, but it put a bookmark in my mind about an organization, right? What was cool though was one of the guys I served in Afghanistan, though, who was in Wounded Warrior with me, he went through Mighty Oaks. And as the Lord was dealing with me through the things I talked about earlier, the Lord used Mighty Oaks in a profound way in his life, and he came to Christ through that. And we met at Olive Garden, where we used to meet before like hikes and stuff, and we had dinner, and we were just talking about, man, the things of God, and I got to hear his testimony of what he learned at Mighty Oaks. And so, man, this is legit. It put that bookmark deeper in my brain. So if you fast forward years, 4 years, at this point, I'm working in pastoral ministry in a church next to Fort Hood. I am running this military ministry there, and Matt Statler, who's a mentor at Mighty Oaks, he's at a church down the road from mine. We're doing this thing together, trying to serve veterans, specifically veterans and active duty soldiers who are dealing with hard stuff on a local level. And Matt and I were like, man, are there any organizations out there that could kind of help us wrap our head around this as we do this? And in that moment, I went, Mighty Oaks. And dude, it was so cool because Matt and I signed up. We're like, let's just go see what it's about, you know? So we applied and we went through the program in 2017. And dude, we were just blown away. It was so cool. It was radically different than how it is today. Just like the level of cadre is way different, and the training and the intentionality has grown exponentially from when I was a student. But still, man, we were just like blown away from the transparency. We were blown away at the love of Jesus that guys had. We felt the love of Christ through the team leaders. At this time, there was no aftercare program in Mighty Oaks. And so when we graduated Mighty Oaks, it was like a week or two later, we got a phone call by a guy named John Foldberg. And John he did Kevin Schroeder's job and he did aftercare, but we didn't know there was there was no mentor role. There was none of that stuff that exists now. John was dreaming it up, and John called Matt and I both, and he said, "Hey, we're gonna try and do this thing called aftercare with Mighty Oaks, and we're starting this new role called mentor." And Now, I would like if the two of y'all would go through the training for a mentor. And so Matt and I were the first two mentors for Mighty Oaks all those years ago when we passed phase training. But yeah, yeah. So it's way larger today, obviously, than with John. But I have the joy to overseeing our mentor team. And so there's a group of about 12, 13 of those guys, and they're basically on site, spiritually mature guys who have gone through training in what we call biblical counseling, which is really what that Pastor David did with me. They get specifically trained in how to do that with our program participants, and they're at every single program. And then when a student graduates, that mentor runs with them for the next 6 months or as needed. It doesn't stop at 6 months, but like the intentional follow up ends at 6 months, if you will. And so they resource that graduate. They're there for moments of crisis. They connect them to essentially the web of Mighty Oak stuff, right? So that's, if you think about aftercare, that's one wing of aftercare. The next one is our outpost that falls under me too. And the outpost is our way of empowering the local church to reach the veteran first responder community within their local context. And so one of our program graduates wants to minister to veteran first responder community there where they live. We will train them. We will partner with that church. And we don't partner with everybody, right? Like, but on general sense, we'll partner with that church. It's our heart to empower that church to serve this community, and we will invest in their leader to do that. We give them curriculum that we've written. We give them structure. We give them really a launch package to do that well. And there are, I believe, 68 of those across the country now. And I think when I started, there were like 30, no, 22, 22 when I started. My predecessor, I think there was like 7 of them when he started. So like we've seen that jump big time. And that's kind of my focus for the year is launching Outposts. But anyway, that's another wing of aftercare because you can have a program graduate the program, get connected to a church, go to his local outpost, and continue to grow and be discipled there. And then another wing is what we call counseling connection. So we have a stable of over 200 biblical counselors. Again, I'm using this word biblical counselor, right? And I'm doing it on purpose because we can go to the VA and we can go out into the world and we can get counseling, right? Or we can even get what's called Christian counseling. But again, it's connected to the DSM-5 TR and the state licenses and all the rules and regulations that come with that, right? But a biblical counselor specifically is going to counsel someone using God's word, using the Bible. So it's unique and it's different. So we believe that the scriptures are sufficient for all of life and godliness, that the work of Christ is sufficient to your needs. And by the way, when you're talking about counseling, you're talking about counseling the immaterial of man, the things we can't see, whether that's secular, integrated with Christian counseling or biblical counseling. We're all trying to counsel the soul at the end of the day. And so, my thing is like, well, let's use the resource that speaks the most about the soul. And so we use the Bible. So the Bible tells us the etiology of all of our problems. Where'd they come from? In the first 25 pages of the DSM-5, they say we don't know where these problems came from. Essentially, if I was to simplify it, probably overly simplify it for some, but in essence, where did these things come from? Well, the Bible says they came through the fall of man, and the problem is sin ultimately. Um, and then we ask the question of like, well, what are the resources that make a healthy human? Well, the Bible tells us that it's through a relationship with Jesus that we are made whole, right? We can have shalom or peace, this life of peace that I was talking about earlier. And lastly, what does a healthy human look like? Have you ever wondered, like in receiving counseling, like to what end, right? Like, what is this supposed to do? Am I just not struggling with this as much? Is that what makes me a healthy human? Or what, well, we have an image of a healthy human in Christ who had all the same emotions we had, who went through suffering like we did, yet without sin. So for the Christian, we're being conformed into his image. And so the counseling we want to give feeds into that purpose that God has placed for the Christian life, right? To mature into Christ Jesus. So I say all that to say one of the big things we have in our aftercare program is counselors who will counsel you this way to help you be conformed into the image of Jesus. And those are the counselors that we partner with regards to aftercare. Does that mean we don't recommend other things, or if other things come up? Not necessarily, but that's where we're hitching our wagon for aftercare purposes. And then the last wing of aftercare, which is really not aftercare, but it's meaningful, is outreach. And so I work with our outreach team to work with applicants on the front end who are in a high risk kind of tier, who possibly can't wait for 8 months to go through the program or more. I got a great team of guys that work for me, and they're just rock stars. And so they make me look good. Anytime I get a platform, I'm saying it's those guys, right? I'm just a knucklehead who points. Those guys are the heat-seeking missiles in Mighty Oaks for sure. Yeah, I would say very simply, if I could encourage you in one thing, is to not have a misplaced hope. What I mean by that is what often happens to the believer and the unbeliever alike is we put our hope in the temporal things of this world, right? In a result that's not guaranteed, or in a person, or in people, or in an institution. You know, uh, we will often, for the veteran, go to the VA thinking maybe today's the day they figure out what's going on with me. And your hope's wrapped up in the service of the VA. Misplaced hope will lead you only in as far as the wisdom of this world can take you, which is not going to be towards true healing. But hope that's found in Christ will lead you to a place of peace and restoration that you can't begin to imagine. So there's a rightly placed hope and there's a misplaced hope. And a rightly placed hope is in eternal things, right? Future redemptive things. I think about Romans 5, 1-5, where he says, therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through Jesus Christ. That's verse 1. What we need, our greatest need for every person, is peace with God. And that happens through faith in Christ. It's Jesus that secures peace. But not only that, he transitions to then talk about this access by grace that we have to God based out of that peace. So we can now, because we have peace with God through faith in Jesus, we can run to God for what we need, and he provides it. And then he sets our expectations, the Apostle Paul, when he says that our afflictions or our sufferings, they're a reality of life. But for the person who has faith in Christ and peace with God, who has access to grace to stand in Christ, your suffering has a purpose. It produces, essentially, it produces endurance, it produces proven character, and proven character produces hope. And that hope is in those promises of God that they really truly will happen. We have to go through the suffering to have our faith, I like to say, like tempered, right? So we will often have faith, but like me, it was weak, and I went through hard things, and my knees grew weak, right? But the faith that the Lord wants to produce in you, He wants to steel it, right? I mean, like the metal, steel it up, like give you a steel spine of faith, essentially. And so, if you're to take just the process of metalworking as an example of this, your faith through affliction, if it stands, it endures, right? And if it endures, it's tempered. And when it tempers, it's proven, right? It's given that stamp of authenticity. And if it's authentic, hope is coming, right? Because what Christ has promised to do in you, He will complete it. And hope is wrapped up in the person, the work of Jesus Christ. And that's what He can do. That's not what we can do. And so if you were to hitch your hope to a wagon, don't do it in the temporary, but do it in the eternal things of Christ. My joy, man. And let me just put this out. Hey, like and subscribe because Bruce Kimbrel's the real deal, man. And at night he wears a mask. If y'all don't know, we think he's Batman, and we've never seen him at night. We've only seen him in the daytime when he's just Bruce. Thanks, brother. I appreciate you. Amen.